All right. So again, going over layers, you have line work. I forgot to mention this last time. I would take your line work here and hold down Alt and drag it. Sorry, Mac users, I don't know what it is. Option, yes. I think whenever it's Alt, it's Option on Mac. I think that's a pretty one-to-one. So basically, I'm making this copy just in case that I accidentally color on it. All right, so the first step we're going to do, I'm going to take my magic wand brush here. Again, if you don't see it, if you hold down and click on the quick selection tool, you should get the magic wand tool. If you're on the line work layer and you click anywhere in the white, because I drew this a certain way, it's going to select only the outside. If there was a hole in here, then it would bleed through, so you'd have to go in and correct that. Now, obviously, we want to color the inside, so you can go to Select Inverse, and you'll see there whatever your short key is. For me, it's Shift-Control-I. And what that does is it says, you know what, I don't want the white, I want the opposite of that, so it's selecting the inside. So now I'm going to take a new layer. So again, that's this little page down here. If you hover over it, it should say new layer. And then I'm going to take my paint bucket tool. It's underneath the eraser. Sorry if this looks a little unfocused to me. See if I can just and on my fresh layer, what I'm going to do is in my color selector up here, I'm going to take a mid gray, just kind of in the middle. Again, another way to do that is double clicking on the square down here, and you get this big color picker. Doesn't really matter what mid-tone, and I'm just going to drop my paint bucket on there. So now you'll notice you have both. Here, if you want to split it out, you could take your layer here, hold down Alt or Option, and drag it up. So now you have two. I'm going to take my rectangular marquee tool up here. I'm going to select the square bottle, and I'm going to hit Delete. And then let's just ignore this other layer for now. I'm just going to turn it off. So now we have a colored in version of our carafe here on the left. Now the first thing I want to do is block out the walls. So I'm going to go back to my line work layer. This may require zooming in, so I'm holding spacebar and Control, which on a Mac is spacebar plus Command. If someone said that, thank you. I heard a mumble. I didn't know. And again, so now I'm going to click in any of these corners. I'm going to hold down Shift and just work my way around. Shift, again, means add to selection. I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll up and down to select these walls. You could also hold down spacebar. You'll get a hand.
Would you now also get the top of the layer?
That's a good question. I wasn't going to, but yeah, why not? Now is a good time to do that. So you could hold down spacebar and grab this top. Again, if you need something a little more accurate, if you hold caps lock, you'll get this crosshair. So now you'll notice, though, that it doesn't select everything. This is, again, where I like to go to Select, Modify, and Expand. And here, maybe we can, I was expanding by 9 before. Let's do by 4 and see what that does. Yeah, 4 seems like a good amount. And so now here I'll take another new layer, making sure to not color in my line work layer. Again, back to my paint bucket tool, I'll take kind of a light gray, and on my fresh layer, I'll drop it into my.
Could you technically just lock the line work layer?
You could, the line work layer. Oh, so you don't modify it? Yeah, you could. Good advice. Yeah, great suggestion. I don't know why I don't use lock. It just bothers me, I guess. So, okay, guys, there's a lock layer here on the far right. If you click on line work and click lock, it won't let you, well, let's see, does it let us select on it? It does. Okay, cool. It locks the layer so that you can't draw or modify it. It gives you this kind of like, I call it this no smoking sign, which is not accurate at all, but it's kind of like the circle with the line too. So no, that's great advice. Yeah, I'll be honest with you guys. I have no good reason why I don't use lock. I like my layers to be fluid, but I probably should use it because I've drawn on the wrong layer plenty of times. Okay, so now we have the wall colored in. Next up, we can get some of the basics. So like the base is maybe what I get next. So again, click on the line work layer, click on the magic wand tool, select the base in the middle. I'm not going to bother expanding with this. I'll make a new layer. Back to my paint bucket tool, I'll pick a gray that's like kind of halfway to black from, kind of like a 70%, and just drop that in there on the bottom. I'm now going to use again, back to the line tool. I'm going to now select this collar. So again, I'm selecting in the middle here, holding down Shift and clicking in the top ring. Select, modify, expand. Let's go by a little more pixels this time. We'll go by 8. It's a little much. If you did 8, maybe it's fine for this. For what we're doing right now, it's okay. If you ever want to go back down, you can always do contract. So I went up by 8. I'm going to contract by maybe like 2. And again, it's all arbitrary. You just get a feel for it. For now, I'm going to do it as a color just so it stands out. So I'll just pick a pure red and drop it in there. Again, on its own layer. Actually, hopefully on its own layer. Did I get that right? I did. And now, like we did with the marker work, we want to get what's behind here. So again, back to the line layer. Whoops. So selecting this in the back. Again, now select, modify, expand. I'm going to go by 6 pixels this time because I went up by 8, down by 2 last time. And then again here, I'm going to take a new layer. This time I'm going to take a slightly lighter red because it'll be a bit faded back here. But the other thing I'm going to do with this layer is I'm going to turn the opacity down to maybe like 50%.
Why do you want to do opacity and a lighter?
Just because between the two, they help make it look like it's behind. The opacity is better. I mean, you could, here, if we want to look at it, now that we have this selected, we could make it a pure red, in which case I would knock the opacity down to maybe like a 20%. So you could do that if you wanted. All right, is everyone with me? Does everyone have something roughly like this? So again, it's a lot of repetition. I'm sorry, it's like this select page, select, fill, select, fill, select, fill. At this point, I would save the file. Always save. It's the worst mistake you can make. Okay. I'm going to drag this up so you guys can see more of my layers. I don't know how to. I'm just going to say close tab group here. If you guys missed what I just did, I went to above the layers, I went to the hamburger, and I went to close tab group. I just want to see all of my layers. It's helpful to see all of them. Again, you can name them if you want to. In this instance, I'm not going to. So one thing we could do is, because this is the layer that has everything, we could take all of these, and if we hold down Alt and click in between them, or on a Mac, it's Command, I think, or Option maybe. Try Option on a Mac. Hold down Option, highlight these layers. Again, I'm holding down Shift to group select, or I think you can select this, hold down Shift, and click on the bottom. It'll select everything in between. Hold down Alt or Option and click. Oh, I thought that worked. It didn't. You got to hold down Option and go and do each of these. And what this is doing is it's locking all the layers, making a clipping mask from all the layers onto this here. So now with the computer, it's all about organization, okay, and where the layers come in. So we're going to be using a lot of a brush today. And again, we're going to also play with like the softness. So let me just do a quick recap on hard soft on a brush. That's a soft brush. Do you see that fade? That's the softest it goes. I get that by holding the left curly bracket, the curly bracket that would start a curly bracket. If I hold down, and again, that's Shift in the left square bracket. If I hold down shift in the right square bracket all the way, I'll make my brush hard. When it comes to rendering, very rarely do I pick a very hard brush like this. At the very least, I'll do like 1 click of soft and maybe even 2 clicks of soft. So avoid this one in the middle. I would try to stick to these two. The ones on the far left are better for matte. These are better for gloss. Again, for those of you that like sliders, you can see that there's a slider up here on this drop-down menu. Okay, so with my brush that is 2 clicks left from hard, so I went all the way to hard, and then I did curly Q bracket, left curly Q bracket twice. I'm going to take a whites. And now if I take a layer anywhere in here, so what might be helpful to label is the wall layer. I tend to keep that one pretty high up. This base layer I keep pretty low. We can ignore the red layers for now. Actually, no, sorry. This layer that's, because we took a transparency on it, actually it's going to be fine. But this layer in the back here, the one I'm turning on and off, I drag that pretty low too, because we want our highlights to go in front of it. So I'm going to take a layer that's underneath the wall and underneath the red collar jacket on the front, and that's the one I'm going to paint on. And so again, now we have our mid-tone. I'm taking a pure white here. If you guys don't want to do a pure white, you could do like a slightly tinted. Doesn't really matter. And now I'm going to take a brush size. Again, it doesn't really matter what size you pick. I'm taking like one that's maybe, let's say, 1/4 the size of the bottle, maybe a little bit under that. And I'm going to click on the bottom left here, hold down shift, and click up here. And you can see I threw it at a bit of an angle. If that's an error, then you can, if you don't like the angle which yours went, you can hit Control Z, click again on the bottom, and then try and get a straighter throw. And that's our highlight. Now we're going to do the same with our low light on the opposite side. So you have 2 color swatches saved here at all times. I can click this arrow and switch to the red. And in this case, I'm going to go to like not quite a pure black, but let's call it a 90% or an 80%. And keeping my brush about the same size on the same layer, I'm going to click on the right here, hold down shift and click up. And that gets our low light. We can then do the same at the top. I'm making my brush a little bit smaller. Again, I'm trying to kind of get like this cone, like this edge on the low light, I'm trying to align with this here before it flares out. If I swap back to the light one, I can kind of start in this, again, I'm visually aligning this here and clicking this out, going this way. Technically, if we want to take the eraser, technically the highlights here where this neck comes in, technically we would want these to like neck in a bit too. So if you want, you can do that. You can take your eraser and kind of erase so that it's parallel to this edge. Everyone with me? You'll notice right now, I'm ignoring this. I forgot to select this top ellipse here. We'll come back and address it. So just ignore this for now. So again, honestly, like, as far as pure basics go, we're almost there. So what can we do to make things a little more gloss? Well, I can take my highlight and make this softer. So now my brush is all the way soft. And on this back edge here, we can get a bit of a reflection catching as the light comes around on the right side. I can do this opposite on the left. So again, I took my lightest layer, made my brush really soft, and painted all the way on the right here. And again, I'm all on the same layer right now. These are all my highlights and lowlights on one layer. If you want to separate them by highlights and lowlights, you can. Again, I can switch to my black or my 90%, and I can do the opposite on this left side and get like just a little bit of a dark reflecting over on that side. Again, all this does is it makes the object look a little bit more glossy. We can do the same on the top, paint it a little bit there. I'm using the edge of the brush to get a bit of a fuzz or fade there. And then with the light one on this right side, I can do the same. Now, one thing we could do at the very bottom of this, I'll take a new layer. So this midtone is pretty flat, and because we're on a computer, we have gradients at our disposal. So if I hold down Alt or Option, I can select this midtone. You know, and I'm going to do it for both of these squares down here. So again, I hold down Alt or Option, I select the midtone in the middle, I swap the swatch, and I select the midtone again. And so now we have the same two colors down here. What we're going to do is we're going to double click, and we're going to move this just a smidge darker. So now we have two very close colors down here. And my reasoning for that is now I want to use these as a gradient. So I took a new layer at the very bottom. It's still part of the clipping mask. If we go to our paint bucket tool and hold down, there's a gradient tool. Now the way that this works, let me show you on a clean layer across the whole top of this page. If I click on the right and drag to the left, you'll see this line up here. It's really subtle, but I think you guys can see it. This is darker on the right and lighter on the left. So whatever, here, I'll make it really clear for you guys. Whatever is your leading box here, the one that's in front of the other, that's what's going to start with your gradient where you click. So again, if I start my gradient on the left here, click and move to the right and drag to the right, it's going to start red and go gray. The length of your click is how slowly the transition of the gradient happens. If I click on the left here and drag it just a short amount and let go, the gradient's really tight. It only happens over the cross of how far you drag it. So, okay, right now I have it swapped, so my lighter box is in front of my darker box. I'm going to go back to this layer. That's a clipping mask of this overall base. And because I have lighter to darker, I'm just going to go light on the left to dark on the right across the middle here. And it's just going to give us a slight gradient across the front. It's super subtle. But it just helps with the three-dimensionality of this. Now I do have my base layer above it. We could take our base layer and just knock down the opacity a bit so we get a little bit of that, maybe to 70. Transparency on a computer is easier because you can really play a lot with the transparency and how things work. Okay. Now to some of the more complex things that we talked about. So if we have a highlight here, we can have a highlight coming up the back here. So again, I'm looking at my back surface here. I can take this same highlight color. I'm making sure that I'm underneath the only danger with taking an opacity on your base layer now is it's going to show some of your highlight. So like another way to do it, I don't know. You know, let's just make our opacity on our base 100% just to make our lives easier for now. So I'm going to take a layer underneath the base layer, and I'm taking my brightest color here for my highlight. And I'm going to, again, I have a soft brush. I'm going to click at the bottom and hold down Shift and click at the top. And again, that's happening above the base. And that's why I changed the opacity. If you really wanted to mess with this opacity down, I might like erase some of this. But again, for now, just make our life easier. Let's just take that opacity out. You know, it doesn't matter how far over you go. I wouldn't go too far, but what I would definitely do is knock this opacity down to like 40%, so it's not too strong. And now we can do the same thing. We can take our black layer and we can do the same thing opposite here. And again, staying underneath our base layer. So again, what effect this is happening is like there's this highlight and it's also catching on the back here. There's this low light and it's also catching on the back here. Honestly, I wouldn't do too much more than this. Again, try to avoid the temptation to do dazzle. If you want to do a bit of dazzle, maybe you could take a mid-tone. You can take a fresh layer above your low light or above your highlight. And like we could see what adding like a little bit of a mid-tone gray to just break this highlight up. And then again, play with the opacity. Maybe it's a little too strong. And again, I wouldn't do too much more than that. Okay, to quickly try and wrap this one up. Okay, so this red is feeling really strong to me. If you hit Control U or Command U, you can like knock the saturation down a bit to the red if you're on the red layer. Also, if it's layer locked, you could also just like select a new color and paint over it. You could also desaturate it and do that color overlay that we talked about last time. I'm just going to leave it red for now for the sake of time. So one thing we want to do on this red layer is layer lock it. So that's pixel lock it. That's clicking on the chessboard when you're on this red layer. I'm now going to use my selecting tool to select this red so that it's in my box down here. I'm going to double click on that, and that's going to get me in the ballpark of where I want to be, and I'm going to pick a lighter red. Now with this lighter red and this pixel locked, I'm just going to use a brush and just paint on the inside here. Now same thing, I can pick the red again, double click on the box, and go with a slightly darker red. This one, again, I'm using my mouse for this. I'll show you guys a new technique in a minute here on an accurate way. Actually, let's do it now. So, okay, so here's what I want to do with my mouse. I'll show you guys, and then I'll show you guys an accurate way to do it. I want to get this like nice, I'm going to make this a bit darker so it stands out a bit more. I want to get a nice red low light in here with a bit of, coarse shadow. That's too dark. I am right now because it's a little bit easier with it pixel locked. If I take a new layer above this to do it, and I do that, yeah, I can't make a clipping mask of a clipping mask. Now, what I could do, you could break this clipping mask. It doesn't, because we selected it properly, we could, here, let's see, Alt and remove the clipping mask, and you could take a new clipping mask to just this red. So if you wanted, you could do that. Again, guys, with Photoshop, like, there's a million different ways to work in it. I show you guys what I tend to do, and I mean, full disclaimer, like what I do is not perfect, right? Like everyone has their own preference, and I love the suggestions. This is how we all learn, right? With suggestions like locking the layer and stuff. So yeah, please continue to shout them out. So that's a good suggestion from Max, that we could make this on its own clipping mask if we wanted to like have this low light be adjustable. Okay, so one last thing. So again, I did this with my mouse, right? I'm pretty happy with it. It's kind of easy to do. I'm just kind of curving it. If we want to do something a little more technical, though, to get that curve, and right now I'm going to use it to do one last thing to this bottle, which is to get that highlight across this front edge here. I'm going to go to my pen tool. Wait a second. Oh, here we go. Sorry. So do you see this layers right here? If you go over, there's a tab called Paths. You can click on that. Go to your toolbar here and look for the pen. It looks like an old school ink pen, inkjet pen. What I'm going to do, so once you have the pen tool, I'm going to click on the right here. It's going to drop what's called a vertex or a vertice. Any of you familiar with Illustrator? This is how Illustrator works, Adobe Illustrator. It drops a vertex. Now I'm going to click in the middle, and I'm not going to let go. I'm going to click and drag. So by clicking and dragging, you'll see I'm starting to draw this line. You see that? And then I'm going to finish this off by clicking on the left side. So that what we're creating now is called a path. It's very similar to vector programs like Illustrator. So I set a vertex and drag to get this. This is called this whole unit is called a spline, is the technical like mathematical term. But once I have this path, you can go away from the pen tool. I'm going to take a quick diversion to my brush tool, and I'm going to set it to what I want it to be. So I'm going to set it to a white. I'm going to set it to be kind of soft and a little bit smaller here. I'm also going to go over here and I'm going to create a new layer just above everything. So let me know when you guys have that. You get the path, you get the soft brush, and you take a new layer. Is everyone with me? No, it's just I would have it above everything else. When you go back to paths, if you right click on this and click stroke path, it's going to ask you what you want to use. If you're on the brush tool already, it should default to brush. You can hit OK. If it doesn't default to brush, click this drop down menu and find brush and click on it and click OK. And boom, you have a white highlight perfectly on that curve. So this is a little more of a pain in the ass, but this is a slightly more advanced version of click rendering. If you're willing to take the time to do paths, if you have like a really wavy object and you want to do highlights on that, you can make that path on that edge.
Is there a way to do it without that?
Path in the middle. So when you're on your path layer, click away from it, and it'll make it disappear. And now again, with this highlight, you can play with the opacity. How extreme do you want that highlight to be? Last but not least is the random highlight dot game, where you can just take a pure white, drop a couple highlights here and there, and make it look like it's sparkling and ready to be bought off the shelf. That's like what I do with my Molotov that I love and hate. It's the ruin your drawing part, but on the computer, you don't ruin it. Unfortunately, I forgot about this up here. So last but not least, I feel like I'm going to say that a million more times, like, oh, one more thing. I'm going to use my magic wand. I'm going to select this really tight ellipse up here. I'm going to take a new layer, take maybe like a mid-tone, and just kind of wash this out, just so that so again, my bucket tool is underneath my gradient tool. Drop a gradient in there, just to kind of wash out these low lights. Again, technically, if you want to get technically correct, now, okay, we're going to go in the weeds a bit. I just made this ellipse here, this tight ellipse with a midtone. If you pixel lock it and go to your brush tool, technically this low light should also be on this back edge here, right? Because it's catching across. This highlight should be on this edge here because it's also catching across. So if you want to be technical, that would be correct for that top edge. And boom, we have a beautifully rendered, hopefully everyone has a beautifully rendered clear cylinder. For what it's worth, you only have to show clear once. You can pick whether to do a clear cylinder or clear cube. You don't have to do both. So you guys have some autonomy in this. All right, because there's 13 minutes left, I'm going to fly through this last one just to show you guys. You don't need to follow along. I'll try and talk through it. The video will record it. You can go through and click back. Okay, so again, step one. So one thing I might do, I'm going to take all of this stuff and hide it in a group for the cylinder on the left. I forget what these layers are. I think these are highlights. It does help to put highlights above your line layer. Like if I unlock this real quick and I just erase this, it's going to make it look better. Because now that highlight's totally passing in front. Okay, so I have my line layer here. So first I'm going to select all the walls to get that blocked out. Again, just trying to move a little bit quickly here. There's a lot of different things blocked out. But this is the same process we just did on the other one. Select, modify, expand by about 6. That sounds good. Take a light gray and drop it in here. You'll notice I missed a little bit here. I can correct that with my polygonal lasso tool and just add to this. Drop this in here. Now we have our wall. Let's grab our base. This one I'm also going to do with the polygonal lasso tool. Reason why, look, I didn't fully complete this. I'm also going to go just a little bit, I'm going to leave a little bit of gray below my base as a little bit of like as that material wraps. There's a lot of soft fillets and stuff in here. You can always move this, whoops, you can always add to your selection. by holding down Shift. You can subtract by holding down Alt. Do you see there's a minus, there's a plus? So if I want to like subtract an n out of here because I'm conceited, I can do that with subtraction, okay? So now I have my base. I'm going to take a new layer. Because I have my base already on the left here, I'm just going to hold down Alt or Option to select this and drop that in. And again, like we're starting to get the basics. We're almost there. I could, like we did on our drawing here, I can select the insides of this. Again, there's this break here, so that's not good. So I'm going to hit, I'll select these guys for now. And then to add in here, I'm just going to I'm going to go to my polygonal lasso tool, which I'm going to build on my magic wand selection. And just like, you know, try and select within the lines. Line work helps keep you guys like, gives you option for a bit of slot. Here I'm going to go to select, modify, expand. I'm going to teach you guys a new tool here. So for those of you who are clicking around, just pay attention for a hot minute. I'm going to go to select, modify. I'm going to contract this just a little bit. I should have done more than that. Okay, new tool here, select, modify, feather. What this does is it takes your selection and it fuzzes it out. So you know how we have a hard brush and a soft brush? Our selections start as hard brushes. If you use this feather command, it makes it a soft brush. So if I click feather, it's going to ask me how many pixels I want to feather it by. Let's do it, whatever. Again, it's somewhat arbitrary. Let's do it by 5. I'll show you what this looks like right now. I make a new layer. I take my brush tool. Actually, I can also use my paint bucket tool. And you can see it gives it a bit of a fuzzy edge. It's only 5 pixels. That's pretty small. If you're not happy with that, you can always go back to your, I'm not happy with it. I can always go back to my history here, go back to before I feathered it, select modify feather. Let's make it 15, see what that looks like. Again, new layer, drop some white in here. You can see how much more fuzzy that is. Again, because it's the magic of the computer, if it's too much of a highlight, I can knock this down a bit. And now I can just kind of go through. So the other things that I might do with this is now I can select along this face. And the same thing, this would be a good thing to feather. Select, modify, feather. 15 feels a bit much. Let's go 10 in the middle. Because this is my 3 face, I can make this dark. Again, order is important. I want to make sure that my base is beneath that. And then I'm going to do the same thing real quick here on this face. This will be my 2 face. Select, modify, feather. In this case, I'll just go mid-tone. So of course I'm obscuring my base a bit now. Again, with the base, it's like, where do you put it? You could put it above those and just drop the opacity down a bit. That's probably the easiest way to do it, so I'm just going to do that for now. And now with these 2 layers, my 3 face, I can lock this. And the same thing, if I want it to look a little more glossy, I can like make this reflection going up this way. If I want a sharper reflection, again, it's pixel locked. I can select a hard edge across the front here. I can take my soft brush and just dab it with a bit of white in the middle. And that gives me a nice sharp highlight. The problem with that is I can't now adjust that if I feel that it's too strong. I could take a layer above it, drop that, and now make that a clipping mask to this number 3 face. I can now like soften the corners here a bit so the hard edge doesn't go all the way to the edge. I can drop that down. I can do the same thing now with my 2 face. Again, I prefer to go this way. I prefer it aesthetically, but like I said, I'll buy the other one. Get this a bit softer. Drop that down, maybe drop the opacity a bit so it's a little less harsh. You know, same thing with this. I could actually lighten this up. This is my levels. I hit Control L to bring this. I could take a pure black, and because this is pixel locks, I could darken that top left edge. It looks all the same to you guys. Let's see, last but not least, I can go to now my wall layer. And this is what I was doing before, where you can, as long as it's pixel locked, I can kind of like paint along this back edge. And as long as I have like a little bit of white that I see through here, it's kind of like as the surface turns away, it gets dark, but it gets to the pure color on the center here. Again, like we did with core shadows, I could do a core shadow pass above my wall layer and just drop some dots in here. These are a little too big, so I'm going to roll back in my history, make it a little bit harder of a brush because it's a sharper core shadow, maybe a little softer. Drop those in there. Then maybe same here, get a bit of white and get some of these pure white highlights on the top here. Cool. Let me see if I can play with my levels here to hopefully make you guys see a little bit more of what I see. Let's see if that helps. No, that's just blowing everything out. Never mind. Obviously, we didn't do this top face, but you know, we could take a new layer, selection mask. The nice thing when you have something done already, I can just use this as my swatch. Just like loosely color this in. You know, if I'm a little bit sloppy, I can come in with my eraser and just like knock this out down here. If I now pixel lock this, I can just quickly grab some of these things and like, you know, try and get a quick, I don't know what happened there. Let's get this a bit. Get that nice dot, that gap. Maybe this will, I don't know, something like that. Cool. Any questions on that? All right, so what do you guys need on Monday? 10 line work. And you should have your thumbnails on there too. Again, I'm going to encourage, it's not required, so if you don't do it, you're not going to lose points, but it will help yourself and the rest of the class. If each person renders one of their 10 pages, it'll give us a little bit more to talk about. Totally optional, but again, the benefit to yourself, let's say you're the only one who does it, you'll get feedback on your materials, and hopefully the feedback is awesome, do this for all of them. But better yet, if it's this is wrong, at least you get that feedback before you turn it into me, and you'll get a better grade ultimately. That's all I got for you guys today. I'll put this recording on